thought there was nothing anyone could have done." His eyes were almost closed. "I thought there was no one there, too." He stopped. "There was someone there," she said quietly. His eyes closed. Park looked up from the head of the table and met Margaret's eyes briefly. No words, but an acknowledgement, the kind that passes between people who have just witnessed something that doesn't have a category. Margaret stepped back from the table. Protocol. The surgeons moved in. Webb took his position, and to his credit, when he began, he worked with precision and without performance, which was the best she had seen from him. She stood at the edge of the room. Her hands were still, her face was neutral. The left sleeve of her scrubs had come back down over her forearm, covering the trident and the date and the 12 hours of that night that had never made it into any record she had ever been authorized to read. The O hummed around her. Monitors, suction, the quiet efficient language of a surgical team in motion. She watched Webb work. She corrected him twice, quietly without announcement. The kind of correction that sounds like information rather than instruction. The kind that a surgeon who is not entirely lost can receive and integrate without losing the rhythm. He received them both. He integrated them both. She noted that when the first phase of the repair was complete, and the bleeding was controlled, and the numbers on the monitors had moved from critical to serious, she allowed herself one breath that was slightly deeper than the ones before it. Voss's chest rose and fell under the surgical drape. Steady measured the chest of a man who was going to be here tomorrow. She made a note of that, too. Outside the O in the corridor, Petty Officer Reyes was sitting in a chair against the wall with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the door. When the door opened and she came through, he stood not slowly, immediately. The way trained men stand when something relevant enters the space. He looked at her, she looked at him. "He's stable," she said. Reyes closed his eyes for approximately 1 second. Then he opened them. "Chief Petty Officer Carter," he said. She hadn't told him her rank. He had heard it from Voss through the trauma bay door or through the gurney transport, pieced together from what he'd been able to catch. She didn't correct him. She didn't confirm. "He'll be in recovery in approximately 90 minutes, she said. "Someone will come find you." She turned to walk back down the corridor. Reyes said. She stopped, didn't turn. "The commander doesn't ask for help," he said. "Not from anyone. Not ever." A pause. "He asked you." She stood in the corridor for a moment. "He didn't ask," she said. "He let me." She walked back toward the trauma bay without looking back. Her left sleeve smooth and flat over her forearm. The trident invisible again beneath the fabric. The date folded back into the silence where it had lived for years. The charge nurse at the station looked up when she came through the doors. Margaret picked up the next chart. She went back to work. Recovery took 93 minutes. Margaret knew because she counted those two. She had processed 4 other patients in that window. A construction worker with a fractured radius, an elderly woman with chest pain that turned out to be costochondritis, a teenager with a laceration above the eyebrow that needed 7 sutures and a conversation about helmet laws, and a man in his 60s who had been waiting for 3 hours with a kidney stone, and was handling it with considerably less composure than Commander Voss had handled a gunshot wound. She had done all 4 without sitting down. When the O-team called the recovery floor at 1644, she was at the nurse's station writing the last notation on the kidney stone chart. The charged nurse, Donna, 20 years in the ER. The kind of person who had seen enough to be unshockable, and had chosen to remain kind anyway, set the phone down and looked at Margaret for a moment. "He's asking for you," Donna said. Margaret set down her pen. "Which one?" "The one who saluted." Donna paused. "All of them, actually. But the commander specifically." Margaret looked at the chart in front of her. Looked at the stack of charts beside it. Looked at the clock on the wall that said there were 2 hours and 16 minutes left in her shift, and at the list of things that still needed doing before those 2 hours and 16 minutes were finished. "Tell them I'll be up when I can," she said. Donna looked at her for a moment with the expression of a woman who has lived long enough to know when someone is using protocol as armor. She picked up the phone and relayed the message. Margaret finished the chart. She went up at 1709. Recovery was quieter than the ER. It always was. The specific quiet of a floor where the acute crisis had passed. And what remained was the slow, unglamorous work of the body reassembling itself. Monitors beeping at intervals, the smell of antiseptic and clean linen, the softer lighting that the third floor used, less fluorescent urgency, more functional calm. Reyes was still in the corridor. He had been joined by two of the other men, the ones in the civilian clothes that fit wrong. They were standing rather than sitting, distributed along the wall at intervals that were not random. She clocked the spacing without intending to. Sight lines, coverage, even here, even now. They were working. She understood it. She had done it herself for long enough that the part of her brain responsible for it never fully stopped. All three of them looked at her when she came off the elevator. She walked past them without stopping and pushed open the recovery room door. Voss was awake. He shouldn't have been, or at least not this awake. The anesthesia didn't let go this fast in most people. But most people were not built the way he was built. And the training that had made him was specifically designed to shorten the distance between compromised and functional. He was at about 70% of functional, which for him was still more awake than most people managed on their best day. He was also attempting to read the chart clipped to the end of his bed. "That's not your chart," she said. "It has my name on it. It has your name on it. And it belongs to the medical team." He set it down slowly with the particular resignation of a man who is accustomed to having access to every piece of information relevant to any situation he is in and finds the concept of restricted access personally offensive. "Sit down," she said. "I'm lying down. You were trying to sit up. I saw you from the door." He looked at her. She pulled the chair from against the wall and sat beside his bed, which was not a thing she normally did. She normally stood. Standing was efficient. Standing was fast. Standing meant she could move. But she sat down now because she had assessed the situation, and the situation was not going to be efficiently resolved from a standing position. "How do you feel?" she said, like I was shot. "Accurate, the repair, clean. Webb did the intercostal repair and the lung reinflation. The vascular work on the bleed was straightforward, once you were stable enough to open." "Webb," he said. The name in his mouth had a specific quality. "He's a good surgeon," she said. "He's a bad everything else, but in the O with a scalpel, he's good." Voss absorbed that. The fairness of it seemed to register. He had the look of a man revising a category. "The decompress," he said. "What about it? You did it in under 10 seconds. Closer to 8. I've seen combat medics take 45. He paused. "I've seen surgeons take longer." She said nothing. "Where did they train you?" he said. "The program has its own pipeline." "I know the program. I've worked adjacent to the program for 11 years. He shifted his weight slightly, and she watched his face for the tell of pain and found it. A compression at the corner of his left eye quickly controlled. "I've never worked with surgical support who moved like that." "You said you didn't have surgical support." "I said the record said we didn't have surgical support." He looked at her steadily. "Those are different things." "I know the difference." She acknowledged that with a small nod. "Chief Petty Officer," he said. "Former once a Chief Petty Officer." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The aphorism was old, and she had heard it since her second year in the program, and she understood why it existed. The monitor beside him beeped. She glanced at it. Rhythm regular pressure at 94/62, moving toward acceptable at its own pace. "There's going to be an inquiry," she said. He didn't react, which meant he had already known the GSW. She said, "The circumstances, chain of custody on the incident report, the nature of the wound, and where it was sustained." She paused. "They'll want to talk to everyone in that trauma bay. Let them talk. Commander, the people in that room are not a security issue. 4 Navy SEALs walking through the ER without processing through admissions is an administrative issue at minimum, and a base commander notification issue at standard protocol." She held his eyes. "And a nurse with a classified unit tattoo is a conversation that someone is going to want to have." He looked at her for a long moment. "Who knows?" he said. "In the trauma bay, Webb, the charge nurse, the resident, the paramedic team." She paused. "Reyes and your men." "Reyes won't say anything that needs to be unsaid. I know it's not Reyes I'm thinking about." He understood. Webb, the resident. The people for whom this afternoon had not been a normal Tuesday, and who had no existing category for what they had witnessed, and whose response to having no existing category was unpredictable. "The tattoo is not a breach," he said. "You're not active. You're not classified personnel. The unit designation is classified. Former personnel retain the right to commander." She said it quietly. "I know the regulations. I wrote several of them." He stopped. She watched him recalibrate again. The third time in this conversation. She found that she did not mind watching him do it. Most people, when they encountered a fact that required recalibrating their understanding, resisted the recalibration. He did not resist. He processed and adjusted and moved forward. It was one of the reasons men like him survived things that other men didn't. You wrote regulations, he said. Advisory capacity. Toward the end of my third deployment, she glanced at the monitor again. Pressure 96. The program had a knowledge gap in their field medical protocols for embedded support personnel. I was asked to help close it. He was quiet for a moment. How old were you? He said. 27. He said nothing. She could see him doing the arithmetic against his own timeline. What he had been doing at 27. What the program had considered reasonable to ask of a person that age. What it meant that he had never known she existed despite working in the same operational theater. Why did you leave? He said. The question was direct. He was that kind of man. She looked at the window on the far wall. The light outside had shifted since she'd come on shift this morning. Late afternoon, now the sun lower, the quality of it different, less aggressive, more considered, the kind of light that made things look like what they were rather than what you needed them. She said, that answer. Lily and I have looked up to her for a long time, not pressing, just looking the way someone there is. A complete answer somewhere, in saying the incomplete one, and that pushing will not retrace her somewhere. So I've more retrieve. The hospital, he said finally. This hospital, is this where you ended up or where you chose to end up? She looked back at him. 40 mi from Coronado, she said. What do you think? Something moved across his face. Not surprise, something quieter than surprise. The recognition of a thing you already suspected. Confirmed. You've been watching the base, he said. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. Not operationally, she said. I'm not running anything. I'm not connected to anything active. She paused. But I know the flight patterns from the airfield. I know which units rotate through. I know the training cycles from the injury presentations we see. And nothing. I left the program. I am not in the program. She looked at him steadily. But I am 40 mi from Coronado, and that was not an accident. He was quiet for a long time. The monitor beeped, regular, steady. Outside in the corridor, she could hear the low, even sound of Reyes's voice. Not the words, just the cadence. Reporting something to someone. She tracked it automatically, assessed it as non-urgent, let it go. There's something you should know, Voss said. His voice had changed again. The medication and the blood loss were still present in it. The roughness, the slightly slower tempo. But underneath those things was a quality she hadn't heard from him yet. Deliberate, the voice of a man choosing to say something he has been deciding whether to say. She waited. The op where you lost your people, he said. The 12 hours. Yes, the after-action report I filed. He paused. It wasn't the first draft. She looked at him. The first draft had the support unit, he said. Had the personnel named 3 surgical personnel embedded with the ground team. I submitted it at Yo 300 the morning after. Command had it back to me by Yo 600 with a revision request. He looked at the ceiling. They didn't call it a revision. They called it a clarification of scope. She was very still. I was told the support personnel had been extracted before the incident. He said, I was told the record needed to reflect the situation accurately. That the support unit's presence in the AO had been a miscommunication, and that official record should not document a miscommunication. The monitor beep. I believed them, he said. I shouldn't have. I had enough experience to know what a clarification of scope meant, but I believed them because the alternative was. He stopped because I needed the alternative not to be true. She looked at the window again. The light outside was going orange now, the last of the afternoon. You thought we were extracted, she said. Yes, we were not extracted. I know that now. She was quiet for a long time. 3 of my people, she said finally. They're in the record as non-existent. Yes, they don't have, she stopped, started again. The families, they received notifications. Standard KI protocol, but the citations reference a training accident. She turned back to him. Because there was no OP. Because the OP didn't officially exist. Because the record said there was no support personnel in the AO. Yes. The word landed in the room and stayed there. She stood up. She moved to the window and looked out at the orange light over the coastal hills and said nothing for 60 seconds, which was the amount of time she needed to put what she was feeling back into the place where she kept things that could not be felt in real time. When she turned back, her face was controlled. "I need you to rest," she said. "Carter, you had surgery 3 hours ago. Your pressure is still low and your body needs volume and time." She moved toward the door. "We can continue this when you're stable." "Margaret." She stopped. He had not used her first name before. He said it the way you say a name, when you need it to do the work that rank and protocol and all the other structures cannot do. The way you say it when you need the person to understand that you are talking to them specifically and not to a role or a title or a function. She turned. "I'm going to correct the record," he said. She looked at him. "I don't know how long it will take. I don't know what it will cost." He held her eyes without flinching. "But I am going to correct it." The monitor beeped. She looked at him for a long moment. "Rest," she said. She walked out of the room in the corridor. Reyes looked up when she came through the door. She stopped in front of him. "He needs fluids and monitoring and someone checking his pressure every 20 minutes, she said. "Don't let him sit up. Don't let him use a phone until at least 1900. Reyes nodded. "Understood." She started toward the elevator. "Chief Petty Officer Carter," Reyes said behind her. She stopped, didn't turn. A pause. "Thank you," he said. Simple. No performance in it. Just the two words carrying what they needed to carry. She pressed the elevator button. "Do your 20-minute checks," she said. The doors opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. She looked at her own reflection in the steel panel of the elevator door. The loose bun, the worn scrubs, the ID badge at her chest. And she thought about a first draft of a report filed at 0300 in the morning after 12 hours that nobody talked about. And about 3 names that existed in the record as an absence. And about the orange light outside a recovery room window. And about a man who had just told her something true that cost him something to say. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. She went back to work. 3. The situation changed. Margaret was at the nurse's station, completing the handoff documentation for the evening shift, when Donna appeared at her shoulder with the specific posture of someone carrying information they do not want to be carrying. "There are 2 men at the main entrance," Donna said quietly. "They've been there for about 12 minutes. Security asked for ID. They showed federal credentials and said they're here for a patient consult." Margaret did not look up from the chart. "Which patient?" she said. "They didn't specify." She set down her pen. Description: dark suits, government haircuts. Donna paused. "One of them has a military bearing, older, maybe 55. The other one's younger, maybe 35, carrying a briefcase. They're being polite, which is somehow worse." Margaret looked at the clock. 18:03. Voss had been in recovery for exactly 1 hour and 19 minutes. "Tell security to hold them at the desk," she said. Standard visitor protocol: ID check. Purpose of visit: documentation, attending physician notification. They said they already cleared it with administration. Administration doesn't clear clinical access. The attending physician does. She stood up. "Who's the attending on record for the patient in recovery?" 3. Donna checked the board. Web, find web. She was already moving toward the stairwell, not the elevator. The elevator was visible from the main entrance. She had mapped the building on her first week of work. Exits, stairwells, sightlines, camera positions, the same way she mapped every building she spent significant time in. Not because she was expecting to need it. Because she was the kind of person who mapped buildings. And that was not a thing that had a switch. She took the stairs 2 at a time without hurrying. Which was a skill she had developed over years. Moving at a pace that looked controlled to anyone watching while covering ground at a rate that was not recovery floor. She pushed through the door. Reyes was at the commander's door, standing rather than sitting. He had heard something or felt something shift in the atmosphere of the floor. She could see it in his posture. The casual had been put away. He was back to scanning. 2 federal agents downstairs, she said as she reached him. They asked for a patient consult without specifying a patient. Reyes processed that in approximately 1 second. "Voss," he said. "That's my assumption. Who are they?" "I don't know yet." Donna said. "One carries federal credentials. One has military bearing. NSJG possible. Could also be someone who heard about the GSW and wants the incident report." Reyes's jaw tightened. The incident report would go through base channels. "Yes," she said. "Which is why they're here instead of there." He looked at the door to Voss's room. Then he looked at her. "How long do we have?" he said. I sent them through standard visitor protocol and told security to hold them for attending physician clearance. Webb is being located. She paused. 10 minutes. Maybe 12. That's enough for what? He looked at her steadily for the commander to know they're here. She considered that. She pushed open the door. Voss was not asleep. She had not expected him to be. He was lying flat. He had respected that much of what she had told him. But his eyes were open, and his face had the quality of a man who had been lying flat and thinking hard for the last hour and had arrived somewhere. 2 federal agents, she said. Main entrance asked for patient consult. No patient specified. One with military bearing. Older, one younger with a briefcase. They cleared it through administration, not through the clinical team. Voss looked at her. That was fast, he said. You expected them. Not this fast. He started to push himself up. Don't, Carter. You are post-surgical. Your pressure is still at 96 and you are not getting up. You need to tell me what I'm walking into. She moved to the side of his bed, because I'm going to go back down there, and I'm going to manage whatever is at the main entrance, and I can do that better if I know what it is. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, sit down. She sat. The op wasn't random, he said. His voice was lower now, contained. The voice for rooms where the door was closed. The GSW wasn't hostile contact from an unknown actor. He paused. We were surveilled. Someone knew our position. Our timeline, our exfil wrote. Inside information. Yes. From where? That's what we were in the process of determining. He shifted his weight carefully. The unit has been running a quiet internal audit for 6 weeks, trying to identify the source. We were close. He looked at her. Someone knew we were close. The monitor beeped. She processed what he was saying, not the emotional weight of it. She would do that later. The same later she was accumulating like unpaid debts. But the operational logic of it, surveillance, internal breach, asset awareness, the men who came in with you, she said, all cleared. Reyes has been with me for 9 years. Then whoever sent those agents downstairs knows you're here and knows you're alive, and is moving to contain the situation before you can continue the audit. That is my assessment. Do the agents know what they're walking into? Almost certainly not. They're likely a procedural instrument. Someone with authorization to request clinical access used that authorization. He paused. The person who sent them may not even be the source. They may just be someone who wants to know what I know before I can report it through channels they can't control. She looked at the door. What do you need? She said. He looked at her steadily. I need 24 hours. He said my comms were in my gear. Reyes has a secure line, but it needs to be routed through the base frequency. And right now, the base frequency is potentially compromised. He paused. I need to get a message to SCOM outside of base channels, and I need the people downstairs to not have access to me or to this room until that message goes. She stood up. Give me the message, she said. He looked at her. I can get it out, she said. Not through base channels, not through anything that touches the standard routing. She held his eyes. I have a contact. A pause from the program, he said. Yes, he made a decision. She watched him make it. The rapid internal calculation of a man assessing an asset he did not have complete intelligence on, and deciding that the incomplete picture was still better than the alternative. He gave her the message, 12 words, a designation code, and a routing identifier that she had not heard in 3 years, but recognized immediately. She memorized it in the time it took him to say it. 20 minutes, she said. Keep Reyes on the door. She walked out. In the corridor, she found the other 2 of Voss's men, the ones in the wrong-fitting civilian clothes, and she looked at both of them and said, nobody goes in or out of that room except Reyes and the nursing team until I come back. If the men at the main entrance come up here before I'm back, you are visitors, and you do not know the patient's name. Both men looked at each other. Then they looked at her. Yes, ma'am, the taller one said. She took the back stairwell to the 2nd floor, then the east corridor to the administrative wing, which was mostly empty at this hour, and into the small break room where the staff kept personal phones in their lockers during shift. She retrieved hers. She opened a contact that was listed as a hardware store in Coronado and dialed it. It rang twice. Yeah, said the voice on the other end. Male Fordish. The specific flatness of someone who answers phones that are not supposed to exist. She delivered the 12 words in the designation code and the routing identifier. Silence on the line for 4 seconds. Copy that, the voice said. The line went dead. She put the phone back in the locker. She took the east corridor back to the main stairwell and descended to the ground floor and walked through the ER toward the main entrance. And she adjusted her face and her posture into the configuration of a nurse who has been here since 7 this morning and has 4 more charts to finish before handoff and is dealing with an administrative inconvenience. The 2 men were at the security desk. The older one was in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, military bearing as Donna had said, but not current military former. The posture was right, but there was a softness in the stance that comes from years away from the physical standard. He was holding a federal identification wallet and looking at the security guard with the practiced patience of a man accustomed to being told yes eventually. The younger one had the briefcase and was looking at his phone. She approached the desk. "I'm the charge nurse," she said. This was not precisely accurate, but it was accurate enough. "Can I help you?" The older man turned and looked at her. "We're here for a patient consult," he said. "We've cleared it through hospital administration." "Administration handles facility access," she said pleasantly. "Clinical access is coordinated through the attending physician. Dr. Webb has been notified and will be down shortly." She smiled. The kind of smile that does not reach the eyes, but is so technically correct that it takes a moment to notice. "Can I ask which patient you're here to see?" The older man's jaw moved slightly. "We were told the patient in recovery would be available for a brief interview," he said. "May I ask in what capacity?" "Federal inquiry. Incident related, of course. And the patient's name?" A pause. "Voss," he said. "Commander Richard Voss." She wrote it on the visitor log clipboard slowly, carefully, as if this were completely routine. "And your identification," she said. He handed her the wallet. She looked at it. Defense Intelligence Agency. His name was listed as Harrove Gerald T. Senior Investigator. She wrote that down too. "Thank you," she said. She handed the wallet back. "Dr. Webb will be with you shortly. In the meantime, our policy requires all federal clinical interviews to be documented with the patient's attending, and the patient must provide written consent prior to interview. We can have that paperwork ready for you." Hargrove looked at her. The younger one looked up from his phone. "That's not typically," Hargrove began. "It's our standard protocol for all federal inquiries," she said. "It protects both the patient and the investigating agency. I'm sure you understand." She smiled again. "Can I get you anything while you wait?" "There's coffee at the far end of the waiting area." Harrove looked at her for a moment. She held the smile. He put his wallet back in his pocket. "We'll wait," he said. "Wonderful," she said. She turned and walked back toward the ER, and she counted her own steps, and she thought about 12 words and a routing identifier and a contact in Coronado who had answered a phone that wasn't supposed to exist, and she thought about 24 hours and what it needed to contain, and she walked back to her station and picked up the next chart. At 1841, her personal phone, still in the locker on the second floor, received a text from the hardware store number. It said, "Received and routing. Stand by." She did not go read it until the end of her shift. She already knew what it said. The message reached Socham at 1917. By 2004, 2 things happened simultaneously. The first, Gerald Hargrove and his younger colleague were escorted out of Coastal Regional Medical Center by 2 men in dark clothing who had arrived through the ambulance bay and had not checked in at the front desk and had shown identification to nobody except Hargrove himself. At which point Hargrove had gone the color of old concrete and left without his coffee. The second, Margaret's phone rang. She was in the parking lot, keys in hand, halfway to her car. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, military routing prefix she recognized. She answered. Chief Petty Officer Carter. The voice was not one she knew, but the weight behind it was familiar. The specific gravity of a man who occupied a position where words cost something. "This is a retired title," she said. "We're aware of your separation from the program." A pause. "We're also aware of what happened in Trauma Bay 1 at 14:36 today and what happened in recovery at 18:03. She said nothing. Commander Voss's message reached the right people. The voice said the audit is being transferred to a clean channel effective immediately. The source of the breach has been identified. She closed her eyes briefly. "The record," she said. "Kandahar. The 12 hours. A silence that lasted long enough to mean something. "We've been looking at that report for some time," the voice said. Commander Voss's first draft was preserved. It was never deleted. Someone archived it incorrectly, which is to say they archived it in a place they believed was inaccessible. A pause. It was not inaccessible. She stood in the parking lot with her keys in her hand, and the evening air coming off the coast, and said nothing. 3 names, the voice said. We're going to correct the record. Full citations. The families will be notified through proper channels within 72 hours. Her throat tightened once, she controlled it. Thank you, she said. Chief Petty Officer Carter. The voice shifted slightly. Not warmer exactly, but something adjacent to warm. There's one more thing. She waited. Commander Voss submitted a supplemental field assessment before he went under anesthesia. He dictated it to Petty Officer Reyes at 1448. A pause. He recommended you for reinstatement, full rank restoration, with a specific request that you be assigned to the program's Forward Surgical Advisory Unit. Another pause. That request has been approved pending your acceptance. She stood very still. The ocean was somewhere beyond the hills, invisible from here, but present in the quality of the air and the particular way the light died at the edge of the sky. I'm a nurse, she said. You're a chief petty officer who has been performing Trige 40 Mi from Coronado for 2 years. The voice said, You've been watching the base. We've been watching you watch the base. Something in the voice shifted, careful but deliberate. We should have called sooner. She looked at her car, at her keys, at the ID badge still clipped to her scrubs that said Margaret Carter, RN in clean block letters above the hospital logo. She thought about a man on a gurney who had called her just a nurse. She thought about the moment he had seen the trident and gone completely still. She thought about 4 men snapping to attention in a trauma bay, while the doctors stood with their mouths open and said nothing. She thought about 3 names and a first draft in 72 hours. When do you need an answer? She said. We needed it yesterday, the voice said. But we'll take tomorrow. She almost smiled. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. She ended the call. She stood in the parking lot for a long moment. The sky was doing something extraordinary to the west. The last of the sunset going deep orange and rose above the coastal hills. The kind of sky that looks like something is being concluded and something else is being opened at the same time. Her phone buzzed. A text unknown number. But she knew the cadence of it. It said, They told me what you did. All of it from the beginning. Then I owe you more than a correction. Then after a pause that she could almost feel across the distance between the parking lot and the recovery floor. Thank you, Chief. She read it 3 times. Then she put her phone in her pocket and walked to her car and drove 40 mem toward the base she had been watching for 2 years. And for the first time since she had left, the distance did not feel like exile. It felt like the road home. The end. If you made it all the way to that salute, you already know why this story matters. Drop a chief in the comments if you believe that real strength never needs a title to prove itself. And share this with someone who has ever been underestimated. A Navy commander, a member of the SEALs, is rushed into the emergency room, hovering between life and death. Bleeding, furious, barely conscious. He refuses every doctor who tries to touch him. He curses. He threatens. He demands someone actually qualified. When the new nurse steps forward, he shoves her back with open contempt. Get your hands off me. You're just a nurse. She doesn't argue. She takes 1 step back, keeps her head lowered, lets the doctors take over and fail one by one as the cardiac monitor erupts in alarms and his vital signs crash towards 0. Then it happens at the exact second he loses consciousness. She moves. No permission, no announcement. She calmly pulls back the left sleeve of her uniform. The room falls silent. On her forearm is something no civilian should carry. The golden seal trident inked beside the unit number, where she once served as an elite combat surgeon in classified operations. The commander's eyes flicker open for a split second. He sees it and he freezes. The 4 SEALs standing in the trauma bay recognize it before the doctors understand what they're witnessing. Instinctively, they snap to attention and salute the nurse. The doctors stand motionless, speechless, because in that moment, the just a nurse was the only person in the room capable of saving his life. Before you read, if you've ever been judged before anyone knew who you really were, like this nurse is about to be, drop a seal in the comments. And if you stay until the salute, share this with someone who needs to see it. The radio crackled at 4:32. Incoming GSW multiple EDA 4 minutes 1 critical. Harrison Webb sat down his coffee and didn't look up from his phone. Who's on Trauma Bay 1? The charge nurse checked the board. Carter, the new one. Webb finally looked up. The new one, he repeated. Not a question, a verdict. Margaret Carter heard him from across the nurse's station. She always heard. She had trained herself to hear everything within 40 faith. A habit she had never been able to unlearn. No matter how many years had passed, no matter how many quiet shifts she had worked since leaving the life behind, she said nothing. She adjusted the ID badge clip to her oversized navy blue scrubs and walked toward Trauma Bay 1 without being asked. That was another habit she hadn't unlearned. She was 31 years old, 5'6". Lean in the way that people who have carried weight for long distances are lean. Not the gym kind, not the runner kind, the kind that comes from necessity. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a loose bun. The kind that looked careless, though nothing about Margaret Carter was careless. Her gray-blue eyes swept the Trauma Bay once, cataloging everything. The defibrillator charge status, the supply cart layout, the angle of the overhead surgical light, the distance from the door to the crash cart. She did it in under 3 seconds. Then she set her face back to neutral, and waited. Webb appeared in the doorway behind her. This is a level 1 Trauma Bay, Carter, not a checkup station. I know what it is, she said. Then you know this case is above your pay grade before it even rolls in. She didn't answer. He wasn't wrong about her pay grade. He was very wrong about everything else. The ambulance bay doors blew open at 14:36. Margaret counted 4 men before the gurney came through. They weren't patients. They moved like a formation, tight, controlled, scanning every corner of the room the moment they entered. 2 wore civilian clothes that fit wrong. The fabric pulling at the shoulders in ways that civilian fabric shouldn't pull. 1 wore a naval base visitor badge that hadn't been checked in through the main entrance. The 4th held the gurney rail and kept his eyes on the man strapped to it. Margaret looked at the 4th man's hands, knuckles scarred. 1 finger previously broken, healed without proper setting. Grip on the gurney rail, not panicked, controlled. But the tendons in his forearm were standing out like cables, which meant the control was costing him something. She shifted her attention to the man on the gurney. He was big, even strapped down and compromised. He was obviously big, broad through the chest and shoulders, the kind of build that didn't come from a weight room alone. Mid-40s, short hair, sand and silver at the temples. A jaw that looked like it had stopped more than one thing it shouldn't have. 2 IVs already running both arms. O2 mask in place, but he'd pushed it to the side, blood pressure cuff alarming. The paramedic at his head looked like she had been verbally assaulted every mile of the drive, and was very relieved to hand this problem to someone else. The wound was left lateral chest below the 5th rib. The field dressing was soaked through. Margaret saw the depth of the soak. She estimated blood loss. She did the arithmetic in under 4 seconds, the same way she had been doing it since a training instructor had drilled it into her, until it was faster than conscious thought. The man on the gurney was not going to survive the next 20 minutes without intervention. He was also at this exact moment actively trying to sit up. Get these off me. His voice was a command, not a request, not a plea. A command that expected immediate compliance. Get them off now. The paramedic started. Sir, you need to remain. I said, get them off. Webb stepped forward in the manner of someone used to being the largest authority in any room. Sir, I'm Dr. Harrison Webb, head of trauma surgery. You're at Coastal Regional Medical Center. You have a significant penetrating chest wound, and we need to. I know what I have. The man's eyes were tracking the room, cataloging the same way Margaret had done, but with a different edge. Threat assessment, not logistical. His gaze moved across Webb, dismissed him, moved to the 4 men who had come in with him. Something passed between them, non-verbal coded. Give me someone qualified. Webb's jaw tightened. I assure you, sir, I am more than. You have soft hands and a country club tan. The man's voice hadn't risen, which somehow made it worse. You've never worked a field wound in your life. I can tell from here. One of the 4 men, the one with the visitor badge, stepped closer. Commander. His voice was low. Careful. We need to let them work. Stand down, petty officer. Commander Voss. That's an order. Petty officer stood down. His jaw worked once. He stood down. Commander Voss tried again to sit up. The monitors screamed. His blood pressure had dropped another 8 points while they had been talking. His O2 saturation was declining. His face was gray under the tan, the kind of gray that Margaret had seen before in places she no longer thought about during the day. Only at night. Webb turned to the room. Someone get Dr. Patel in here and someone call Dr. Morrison. Morrison's in surgery, a resident offered. Then get him out. Webb turned back to the commander with the practiced authority of a man who had never been told no by anyone who genuinely frightened him. Sir, I understand you're uncomfortable. But I am the senior trauma surgeon in this facility. And I need you to call someone who knows what a sucking chest wound looks like before the body bag closes around them. That's what you need. The room went a degree quieter. Webb's face went a color that Margaret recognized as the early stage of an ego beginning to separate from its moorings. She had already moved to the supply cart. Not dramatically, not fast, just moved. The way she moved in scrubs was one of the things she had worked very hard on since leaving the program. She had learned to make herself smaller, slower, civilian. It required effort, the way speaking a second language fluently in a country not your own required effort. And occasionally, when she was tired or frightened, the accent slipped. She pulled on gloves and moved to the left side of the gurney. Commander Voss's eyes found her. He looked at her the way men like him looked at things that needed to be assessed and dismissed in the same breath. Who are you? I'm your nurse. I didn't ask what you are. I asked who. Margaret Carter. Carter. He said her name the way you repeat a word you don't believe is real. You're a nurse. Yes. Then stepped back. I don't need a nurse, I need a surgeon. You need about 90 seconds of work before a surgeon is relevant, she said. Her voice was quiet, even. You're running a left-sided tension component, and your trachea is going to shift if we don't decompress. After that, we can argue about the surgeon. Voss stared at her. Something moved across his face, too fast to name. Then it was gone, replaced by the wall. Step back. She didn't step back. She reached for the dressing, and he caught her wrist. His grip was hard, harder than it should have been from a man who had lost this much blood, which told her something about his baseline that she already suspected. The room held its breath. Webb made a sound. Margaret looked down at the hand on her wrist. Then she looked up at Commander Voss. Sir, she said, I am going to ask you to let go. Then ask. Let go. He didn't let go. His grip was still hard, but his face was doing something complicated. His O2 sat dropped another point. The monitor announced it. His blood pressure number on the screen behind him was a number that Margaret had seen precede unconsciousness before, more than once. In locations no one in this room had ever been. She did not pull her arm back. She did not call for help. She stood with his hand on her wrist and held his eyes and waited, the way she had learned to wait in rooms far more dangerous than this one. I've done this before, she said. I know what I'm doing. You're a nurse in a hospital 40 miles from Coronado. His voice had gone lower, rougher. The gray in his face was getting worse. You have no idea what you're doing with a man like me. She said nothing. Let the surgeons work, he said. Let someone qualified in here, someone who's been somewhere, seen something, someone who knows what it actually costs. His grip loosened slightly, not from surrender, but from blood loss. He couldn't stop regardless of how hard his will was pushing against it. Not some girl in scrubs. Margaret Carter looked at Commander Voss for one long moment. Then with her free hand, she reached across her body and pushed the sleeve of her left arm up to the elbow. She turned her forearm toward him. The tattoo was not large. It sat on the inside of her forearm, precise and deliberate, the lines clean despite the years. A golden trident. Below it, in small block letters, the unit designation below that, a date. Commander Voss's grip on her wrist went slack. His eyes dropped to the tattoo, stayed there. The machine behind him alarmed again, and he did not look at it. He did not look at Webb. He did not look at his men. Though she heard the shift in the room when they saw what he was seeing. He looked at the tattoo. His face did something she had not expected from a man like him. It broke just for a second. Then the wall came back up. But she had seen it. The part that had been holding everything rigid. The command and the aggression and the contempt. It cracked the way ice cracks when the thing beneath it finally pushes through. You served, he said. It was not a question. Team support surgical, 3 deployments. She kept her voice level. I know what your wound caused. I know what it means that you're still talking. And I know exactly what I'm doing. Commander Voss behind her. She heard it before she saw it. The sound of 4 men moving. Precise, simultaneous. She didn't need to look. She knew the sound. She was already pulling on the dressing. But the silence in the room had changed completely. She didn't look at the salute. She knew it was happening. She heard it. 4 men snapping to attention simultaneously makes a specific sound. The kind of sound that has no civilian equivalent. The kind that goes straight to a part of the brain that doesn't process language. She had heard it before. She had stood on both sides of it. She kept her eyes on the wound and her hands moving, and she did not look. Webb looked. Webb looked the way a man looks when the floor beneath him turns out to be a ceiling. His mouth opened, closed. He took 1 step backward without appearing to realize he had done it. The resident beside him, young, 30-year, good instincts, bad poker face, went completely still with a fresh pair of gloves halfway onto his hands. The charge nurse behind the crash cart pressed her lips together and said nothing, which was the most professional response in the room. Commander Voss had not saluted back. He couldn't. Both arms had IVs. His left hand had just released Margaret's wrist and dropped to the gurney rail, and was gripping it now for a different reason than before. His eyes were still on her forearm, on the trident, on the date beneath it. That meant something specific to anyone who had been there, for what happened on that date, in that theater, in that particular 12 hours, that nobody talked about in open channels. He knew the date. She saw him recognize it. His face did the thing again. The crack, the thing beneath the ice. And this time it lasted a full 2 seconds before the wall rebuilt. "Petty Officer Reyes," he said. His voice had changed. The command was still there. It would always be there. But something else was there now, too. Something rougher and older and less armored. "Stand your men down." "Already done, Commander." "Not what I said." A pause. Sir." She heard the move again. The posture shift. The formal position releasing into something that was still military, but 1 degree less rigid. She still didn't look. The dressing came away in her hands, soaked through. Dark, the kind of dark that tells you more than any monitor. She dropped it, called for gauze without raising her voice, and it appeared at her left hand in under 3 seconds, because the charge nurse had been watching her hands, not the salute. "Good 2 sat," she said. 91 the resident managed. He had gotten the gloves on. He was trying to remember that he had training. BP 78/50. Low but holding for now. She pressed 2 fingers along the left lateral chest wall, following the wound track by feel the way she had been taught to follow it. Not guessing, not approximating, reading. The wound itself was a through and through. Entrance posterior, exit anterior, low enough to miss the heart, but the trajectory had kissed the lung. She could hear it without a stethoscope. The faint wet sound on his left inhale that didn't belong there. "Left pneumo," she said. "Partial, not yet tension, but trending." Webb made a sound. She glanced at him briefly. His expression had reorganized itself from shock into something that wanted to look like authority and wasn't quite making it. He was recalibrating. She could see him doing it in real time. The rapid internal negotiation of a man who has built his identity on being the most qualified person in any room, and has just encountered evidence that this is not that room. "I can take over from here," he said. His voice was careful, measured, the kind of careful that is really about the speaker, not the patient. "You can assist," she said. Not unkind, just moved. She turned back to Voss. "Commander, I need you to stop fighting the restraints. Every time you tense your core, you're increasing intrathoracic pressure on that side. I need you to breathe shallow, slow. Let the left side rest." He looked at her. "That goes against every I know what it goes against." She held his eyes. "Do it anyway." A long 2 seconds. Then he exhaled slowly. And on the next breath, his chest moved differently, still guarded, still controlled, but listening to her instead of fighting her. The monitor's alarm dropped 1 register. Not silent, but lower. "Good," she said. "Don't tell me good, then I won't. Keep breathing that way." She called for a 14-gauge angioth without looking up from the wound. The charge nurse had it in her hand before the words finished leaving Margaret's mouth. She felt the eyes in the room on her hands. Not just the medical staff, but Voss's men too. Reyes had moved 2 steps closer. Not interference, witness. There was a difference, and she understood it. She found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line by touch, cleaned the site, held the angle. "Decompress on 3, she said to the room and to Voss equally. 1, 2. She didn't say 3. She inserted on the count. The angioth went in clean, the angle right, the depth right, the resistance right, and the hiss came exactly where it should, a sharp release of pressure that the room heard clearly over the monitor noise. Voss's body responded before his face did, the involuntary expansion of the chest as the compressed lung found space again. The color in his face shifting by a fraction from gray towards something closer to human. His O2 sat moved 91 to 93. It wasn't enough, but it was movement. BP, she said, 82/54, still low, still dangerous. But the trajectory had changed. Webb stepped forward. His instinct to do something, to be visible, to reassert position in the hierarchy was winning over his capacity to read the room. She understood it. She didn't have patience for it. He still needs the O. Webb said the wound track. I know the wound track, he'll get the O. She reached for the secondary dressing without breaking the rhythm. Right now, he gets stable enough to survive the transport there. That's what we're doing. You can book the room. Webb opened his mouth. Petty Officer Reyes turned his head and looked at Webb with an expression that contained no hostility and no aggression, and nonetheless communicated something with exceptional clarity. Webb closed his mouth. He turned and walked to the phone on the wall. Margaret packed the wound with her right hand and maintained pressure with her left, and did not allow herself to feel anything about any of this, the same way she had learned not to feel things in real time. Because real time was for working, and there would be time afterward to feel whatever needed to be felt in the car on the way home, or not at all, which was also a method she had used more than she should have. Voss was watching her. He had been watching her since the tattoo. Not the way he had looked at her before. The dismissal, the contempt, that this person is not relevant. But the way operators look at things they are trying to understand. Assessing, recalibrating, running the new information against the old picture and finding that the picture needed to be redrawn entirely. 3 deployments, he said. His voice was quieter now. The blood loss was doing what blood loss does regardless of will. Team support surgical. Yes, the date on the tattoo. She didn't answer. I know that date, he said. I know you do, Kandahar, he said. One word. The word that wasn't really a word. That was a place and a timeline and a set of events that had a before and an after with nothing soft in between. She said nothing. Her hands kept moving. How many did you lose that night? He said, not asking, remembering. The question was for himself as much as for her. 3. Her voice didn't change. You too. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were clearer than they had been since the doors blew open. I didn't know they had surgical on the ground that night. We were told there was no support. There wasn't, she said officially. He absorbed that. The monitor behind him continued its steady alarm, still critical, still informing anyone listening that this man's body was working harder than bodies are designed to work. His blood pressure held at 83. His O2 sat climbed another point. The dressing was holding. She checked the IV flow rates, adjusted the left line without asking anyone. The resident watched her hands and said nothing, and she could feel him memorizing what he was seeing. Good. Let him memorize it. Carter Voss said. Commander, why are you here? He wasn't asking about the trauma bay. He meant the hospital, the scrubs, the ID badge, and the loose bun, and the oversized navy blue uniform of someone who was supposed to be unremarkable. She considered the question for a moment. Same reason you wore the uniform longer than you were supposed to, she said. And the same reason you're still giving orders from a gurney with a hole in your chest. She secured the dressing edge and pressed her palm flat against it. Because it's the only thing that makes sense. He looked at her for a long time. The charge nurse made a small sound that was not professional and immediately recovered. The resident's gloved hands had been still for approximately 40 seconds. She heard him remember to move them. Reyes had come one step closer. She could see him in her peripheral vision. His expression was the kind that happens when a person encounters something that reorganizes their understanding of a situation they thought they understood. He was looking at her the way his commander was looking at her. Not with difference yet, but with something that was deciding whether difference was appropriate and arriving slowly at an answer. Or 3 is ready. Webb called from the phone. His voice had changed. She noticed. She didn't comment. Good. She looked at the monitor. 85/57. 3 more minutes and we move. 3 minutes. Voss repeated. You can argue with me about it for 3 minutes if it helps you stay conscious. He almost smiled. Not quite. Close enough that the resident actually took a half step backward. Margaret Carter, he said, trying the name again differently this time. Team support surgical. He said it the way you say something when you're filing it in the correct location. Correcting an error in a record you thought was complete. What was your rank? She looked at him. Chief Petty Officer, she said. When I left, the monitor beeped. She checked his pressure. 87. Moving in the right direction. Behind her. Petty Officer Reyes said something quiet to the man beside him. She didn't catch the words. She caught the tone. It was the tone of a man revising a conclusion he had been confident in 30 seconds ago. She pulled a fresh pair of gloves from the box at the supply cart. 2 more minutes, she said, then we take him upstairs. Nobody argued. They moved him at 14:51. The transport from Trauma Bay 1 to 03 took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Margaret knew because she counted. She always counted. Time was not abstract in her world. Time was the difference between a man who walked out of a building and a man who didn't. She walked at the left rail of the gurney. Reyes walked at the right. Nobody had told him to. Nobody had told him not to. He had simply moved into position the way trained men move into position, not because they were instructed, but because the situation had a geometry, and his body understood the geometry before his mind had finished processing it. Webb walked 3 feet behind. He had not spoken since the phone call. She was aware of him the way she was aware of all non-threats in a controlled environment, registered, cataloged, not prioritized. The O team met them at the elevator. 3 nurses, a scrub tech, and the anesthesiologist, Dr. Lena Park, 42, steady hands. The kind of quiet that comes from competence rather than uncertainty. Park looked at Margaret, looked at Reyes, looked at the configuration of who was standing where on this gurney, and made a rapid and accurate assessment without asking any questions. Margaret respected that. What do we have? Park said GSW left lateral chest entrance posterior 7th intercostal exit interior 5th partial left pneumo decompressed at 1439 BP is holding at 87/60 odus at 94 large. Both IVs both running wide. He lost approximately 800 cc's meal before the dressing held. Park nodded, absorbed, adjusted. Whose primary surgeon AF second assistance? I am. Margaret said nothing. She moved with the gurney into the elevator and kept her left hand on the dressing and felt the familiar compression of the space. 4 people and a gurney, and the specific kind of tension that exists when a man is alive by a margin that is too narrow to feel comfortable about. Voss had his eyes open. He was fighting the sedation that the paramedics had started in the field. She could see it in the set of his jaw. The controlled effort of a man whose body was trying to shut down and whose will was refusing to file the paperwork. It was something she had seen before in men like him. The body and the training running opposite directions, and the training winning longer than biology had any right to allow. You should let the sedation work, she said without looking at him. I'll sleep when I'm dead. That's what I'm trying to prevent. Then stop talking and keep the pressure on. She kept the pressure on. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor and the O team moved. The corridor was wide, lit with the specific overhead fluorescence of surgical floors. Cooler, sharper, the kind of light that flattens everything into clinical clarity. She had worked under lights like these before, not in hospitals, in places that had borrowed the principle without the infrastructure, that had improvised the sterile field from what was available, that had done the work anyway. Because the work needed to be done at the O doors. Reyes stopped. Scrub protocol, he knew it. He didn't argue, but he put one hand briefly on the gurney rail, not holding, just a point of contact. The kind that carries meaning without words, and looked at Voss. Voss looked back at him. Something passed between them that Margaret did not need to interpret. She had seen it before. The look that goes between men who have been in the same places and come back from them, and know in the specific way you can only know it from the inside. That coming back is not guaranteed, and the fact of it matters. I'll be outside, Reyes said. You'll be outside, Voss confirmed. Rhea stepped back. The O doors swung open and Margaret went through with the gurney and did not look back. The room was already set. Lights at surgical temperature, 5600 Kelvin. The kind that leaves no shadow. Instrument trays laid out. The scrub tech standing at the back table, with the specific posture of someone who has done this 10,000 times and still takes it seriously. Park moved to the head of the table and began the pre-induction sequence without waiting to be asked. Margaret moved to the left side. Webb moved to the right. He looked at her across the table. His expression had undergone several revisions in the last 22 minutes, and had arrived somewhere that was not quite humility, but was in the same neighborhood, approaching from the direction of surprise. "I'll need you to step back when we open," he said. "I know the protocol. I'm not questioning your—" He stopped, restarted. "You decompressed correctly. The pressure management was—" He stopped again. She waited. "It was right," he said. The words came out like a man setting down something he had been carrying at an uncomfortable angle. "What you did, it was right." She looked at him for a moment. "The patient," she said. He blinked. "Focus on the patient," she said. "We can do the rest of this later." He nodded once, turned to the table. "Good." Boss's eyes found her as the O-team transferred him to the surgical table. The sedation was working now. She could see it in the loosening at the corners of his mouth, the slight heaviness behind his eyes that even his training couldn't override indefinitely. But he was still present, still watching. "Carter," he said. His voice had gone lower. "The blood loss and the medication were pulling at it. I'm here. The date on your arm." His eyes were tracking toward closed but not there yet. 12 hours. "Yes. I wrote the ARs for that op. After action reports. The official record of what happened. Sanitized and formatted and filed in the kind of place that most people who had been there would never be allowed to read. I wrote that there was no surgical support on the ground. That's what the record says because that's what I was told." She held his eyes. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Park was working at his head. The scrub tech was moving. The room had its rhythm now. The specific focused rhythm of a surgical suite preparing to do the thing it was built to do. "Why?" he said. Not an accusation, a genuine question. The kind that comes from a man who has built his understanding of a situation on a set of facts and has just discovered that one of the foundational facts was wrong. Why wasn't it in the record? She adjusted her glove at the wrist. "A habit because the unit I was attached to wasn't supposed to be there either." She said, "We were operating outside the sanctioned perimeter. Command had assets in the AO that weren't on the official manifest. If the record showed surgical support, it showed the support unit. And if it showed the support unit, it showed the operation. And if it showed the operation, it showed the assets." He said yes. He absorbed that. His eyes were heavy now. The anesthesia was winning, but his mind was still running. She could see it. The processor that didn't know how to stop. The same processor she had watched refused to shut down in men who had been awake for 72 hours, who had blood through their gear, who were running on nothing but the specific stubbornness that the program selected for. "3 of your people," he said slowly, the words coming up from somewhere deep, "on that op." "Yes, I lost 2. He exhaled a long, slow release that was not just sedation. "I thought about that night for a long time." "So did I."